What is up? It is Monday evening. I gotta get home because I gotta do a live stream soon. And I don't want to miss that because it's scheduled. Did a couple topics today that were submitted. I think there's a third one, but it's on my whiteboard and I am not at home to look at my whiteboard. I basically remembered two that I wanted to go through, and I did them both this morning, but the third one, I can't recall. So I was thinking about talking, like just doing a stream of consciousness around like what it means to, I'm already nervous about saying this word, what it means to be agile. I can visualize the clickbait title right now, right? Because everyone is up in arms about Agile, and Agile's never worked, and I mean, whatever. But I wanted to talk through this, kind of share my thoughts around like being, my experience at least in a startup, and what that looked like, again, to be air quotes. I'm going to be using, I'm going to be saying air quotes Agile a lot. It's dark in here, so you probably can't see. But I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how that started to change as the company grew. And then I want to talk about like what my observations are in big tech so far. Obviously, your mileage will vary with all of this, and kind of compare and contrast things, because I think there's, I don't know, I think it's very interesting when we start thinking about scaling things up and like how do we maintain, it's a triggering word, I know, but how we maintain agility. It's funny, when I started at Microsoft, I was hired onto a team that was called Deployment Agility, right? So it's always about agility. But if you have questions and stuff you want me to go over, add them in the comments. I will review them and then try to get something put out for folks. And if you want it to be anonymous, just send me a DM on social media. Find me as a dev leader, basically on any platform. Just say, hey, was watching Code Commute and was wondering if you could talk about whatever your scenario is. The more detail you add, the more effectively I can try to respond. And of course, I'll keep it anonymous because it doesn't benefit me in any way to not do that. So with that said, agility, I'm not strictly talking about the capital A Agile here. I think in theory, capital A Agile is supposed to contribute towards that, but I realize in practice, especially from hearing from many people, that's not actually been the case that they've experienced, right? In fact, a lot of people in the last whatever, you know, that I've observed, at least in the last 10 years, have been saying like, no, Agile is not, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's just processes. But like, it's kind of ironic because like, by definition, it's not supposed to be. So it's kind of funny to me, but this is the worst I've ever seen this spot of the highway. What's going on here? Let's get out of there real quick. So when we're thinking about agility, I'm going to keep saying the word agile and agility, and I don't want you to think Scrum, to think Kanban, because I think for at least a lot of people, they're hearing that word and they're going, well, no, when people were talking about agile, it's only been this bad negative experience. People are putting processes in place. There's, you know, we're doing sprint planning with the cards and the story points, and like, this is the opposite of being agile. And like, yeah, I get it, man, like totally. And when we were doing that stuff at the startup that I was at, like over time, my team stopped doing that because we said, this is ridiculous. At least for us, we're spending way more time doing dumb shit with cards versus just building software. So what we would end up doing is we had a baseline to start with these things, okay? So it's not that we did literally no type of process or ceremony and it was just like, you know, you come in every day and hope that you're working on the right stuff and cross your fingers. There was more structure to it, but it took a couple of years of like trying to be a startup, trying to like make things work and going, okay, well, everyone's saying that we need sticky notes on a board and we got to digitize it and like we got to do story points. Like we had to try this stuff out. And then we were like, this feels terrible. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't work. So I'm not here to say that like Agile in that sense doesn't work, but it didn't work for us. In particular, the teams that I was running, it just was awful. And what would happen is like when we were pulled into other teams to work with them and they still were using story points, you could feel like, from my experience, you could feel how much less effective it was to go try and do that, because we'd be like, why are we debating a 3 versus a 5 or a 1 versus a 3 on these story points when like you could have been halfway done the work. So what we found was valuable, to be honest, was not a story point debate, but what was interesting is those story point debates would trigger conversations. And what we found was valuable was the conversations around, like, when someone says we got to do X work, like, what things are involved with that, right? And we would have conversations about these types of things, like our understanding. And what was interesting is that we would try not to go completely off the rails and like implement it, but it was good to get a high level understanding, think about some technical challenges that could come up in general, right? And just like having a conversation about these types of things was really useful. Now, we also had a very technical product owner, which is great. At a different point in time, our product owner switched out. We had a less technical product owner, but he ramped up in the domain quite effectively, and he had a lot of trust with us. And that worked really well for us because we could find ways to explain things and maybe ditch some of the technical concepts. And because he trusted us a lot, we could kind of arrive at, like, if we needed to push back, like I said, there was trust, so that he's not like, are these guys just being lazy? Like, we would be like, no, man, like, there are some challenges with this. So, like, if you want us to do X, like, we can do it, but realize there's going to be a cost associated with Y over here, and, like, kind of, like, give him the options to pick and choose. But it was all based on the fact that we had a good trust relationship. Oh, my God. Come on, people. One more lane, let's go. Now we're cooking. There's like no traffic today. I say that, and then I'm looking at my Google Maps, and it's like stalled vehicle ahead, and it's just solid red. We'll see. So, where did I got distracted. It's me merging onto the highway. Come on, Nick, get your head on. I was talking about teams, talking about being agile. We got past the story points. You can tell it's Monday. My brain's just like it's not on. The conversations about, like, I was talking about product owners. Okay, we're back on track. Welcome back, folks. So for us, it was like this core concept where we, like I said, we started with some type of process because we had to start somewhere. And starting with process, like, was that a good idea? Maybe not. There was a bit of a reset point for us where one of my core teams, we basically started a product from scratch. And when we were building this thing, like, we did start with zero process. Okay, so I should clarify that. We started with zero on this one product and formed a team around it. So in this particular case, This was a project that we kicked off to try and see if we could build something in-house. So for context, for folks that aren't aware, when I worked at a digital forensics company, I spent a lot of time doing prototypes and then scaling out the products afterwards. So I had built a lot of the sort of initial product offerings. When I say initial product offerings, I mean not the original product. That's not my concept. But I mean a lot of the teams that were formed stemmed from prototypes that we would go build, and then they would kind of scale them out. So on this one team, and I think this is where this actually worked really well for us, we basically said we're going to see if we can build this in-house. We built a prototype that focused on a technical challenge. So terrible user experience. You could never, it wasn't an MVP in the sense that you could give it to someone to use. But we wanted to prove technical feasibility of something, because we said, if we can prove that this works, this guy's flying behind me, holy crap. We said, if we can prove this works, we know we can build a product around it. The business has already decided we want this product, but we can build it in-house if we can get past this technical hurdle. And the reason we knew that is because we had already started outsourcing some of the development, and they were trying to make progress on the front end of it and not even succeeding at that. So we said, we know we can do that, but the technical part, no one has, the technical part, no one's proven if it's feasible to do. So we basically kicked that off, proved the initial prototype, and then it was go time. So we essentially locked ourselves in a room at the office and started building this thing out. And there was no process. And I can remember, so there was two of us. We brought in our test strategist. So it was technically he was a product owner, but he's one of the technical product owners, very, has a engineering background, software development. So we were coding this. We had our test strategist come in to kind of be our user proxy, helping us think through how we would address certain things. And we started building this thing out, and I can remember getting to two interesting inflection points. One was when we said, okay, this thing is real, we're doing it, and we already have a product suite that exists with branding, with how it's a real product that people are buying. So we said, wait, if we're making this real, we should probably start bringing in our UX designer to help us navigate this. So this was an interesting point in the development process where that was changing things. We're starting to add a little bit more structure. Should we go build things to the UX spec versus just drop a button in here, get it going, and let's keep moving on? So there was that moment, and then there was also this point where we were saying, and it was so funny, we were like, do we need to start making, we used Jira at the time, so do we need to start making Jira items for this? Do we have to start keeping track of some of this stuff we're doing? And it was a natural thing for us because we started to realize there were too many conversations. We should do this, we should do that. Oh, remember there's a bug here, we should go back and fix that. We basically started stumbling a little bit because we were trying to do too many things at once. So a very interesting situation where instead of being forced to use a tool, we were in a position that was number one, the UX designer starting to introduce a process, have the UX designer sit down with us, go through things and try to build a UI out. That was one part. And the second part was using a tool, not being forced to use it, but trying to look for a tool that's going to fit one of our needs. Because we need to, we're losing sight of what needs to be done. So both of these were a natural progression. And from there we started to evolve other things over time, but we always kept things pretty slim. Eventually we would move on to do sprints. And that was, I don't know when that came, to be honest. But we did sprints mostly because we wanted to number one, align to some of the release cadence for some of the other teams, doing like monthly releases. So I wanted to align to that. By the way, this is like desktop-based software, in case you're wondering, for context. So aligning to that, but also because we wanted to do retrospectives. And this is a big thing for us because remember I just said like we wanted to like try using Jira, right? Like this is like, it may not seem like it, but it's like one of our first experiments as a team, right? We're basically saying we think that we have something we want to try to improve things. We should try it and see how it goes. That's an experiment. But how do you know if the experiment works? And what if it doesn't work? What if you very well it's not working? Or how much time do you give something to try it out? So we said like we should have sprints and we should do retrospectives to talk about these things. And really, when it came down to it, planning for us came sort of at like a regular interval, not a regular interval, irregular interval. Came at an irregular interval. Yeah. Words. So what I mean by that is we didn't say, okay, every quarter we're making our planner, we're doing yearly planning, or we have like semester, like a 6-month planning kind of thing. It would be like we generally have an idea of the direction we're going in. We would use our sprints to kind of iterate on that stuff. And then periodically we would say, okay, like we, as a team with our product owner, we're starting to feel defocused, right? We're starting to go, is this really the right thing? And then we would use that as a point to say, you know what? We got to sit down and have a conversation and just get on the same page, realign our values, make sure we're focused on the right stuff. And that worked, in my opinion, that worked so well because we didn't have like wasteful planning, like, hey, go plan for the next 6 months to a year, and the only thing you know for sure is you're not going to do over half of what you said. So like it wasn't wasteful, and our product owner had the insight that he needed, right? Like he had the runway to have a rough idea what was coming. He could plan around that. So it worked well for us. So when I say that we were an agile team, I mean like we had a lot of agility. We could pivot. Our processes were extremely light. We did use sprints. We did have retrospectives. Those things are air quotes agile, the capital A. But that's how we did things. Now, I think that just really allowed us to focus on the right stuff. We didn't have shit getting in the way of what we were doing. We could focus on what was a priority. And if we felt like we were getting misaligned, we would use that as a feedback mechanism to get ourselves aligned. So I think that worked well. It let us move very fast because we could pivot as necessary. So I think that worked out really well. What else? By the way, it's not obvious as I'm telling this, that product that I'm describing that we were building, at one point we had to pause development on it, and we started helping with other things, and we ended up continuing to prototype a bunch of other stuff, and then we came back to this product to kind of have like a full-time team around it. So just as a heads up, like what I'm describing was useful, and the progression of not only how we approach this product, but how we approach operating as a team. So we actually had the core of our team kind of move around to different areas and focus on this stuff. So I think that's something else to be said. Is like we were kind of like a unit that moved around, and that meant that we understood how each of us worked. Periodically we would have interns and stuff. I actually had a lot of interns on my teams through the years, and so that would be a new dynamic, or a new team member, something would come in, but for the most part, pretty consistent team. Okay, so when I realized I focused on maybe a little bit of a different aspect than I wanted to initially go down, but that's what happens when you're driving a car and stream of consciousness ranting about software. So if I shift gears and I start looking at like how some of the stuff works in big tech, some of it feels bad to me. Maybe I'll put it that way. I'm not saying it is bad, but I'm saying some of it feels bad. And it feels bad because I'm used to, personally, when I'm running teams, doing it a lot more lean. And I realize lean is probably also a loaded word too. You can't pick any words these days. Lightweight, I guess. Like there's not a ton of process. We're kind of doing things as needed. Now, I've noticed, and my exposure has been to Microsoft on a couple of different teams, but I've noticed that there's a little bit more, maybe a lot of it more, like process in place for the most part, is maybe how I'd frame it. But it's weird because I don't necessarily think like it's wrong. I was trying to be careful when I say like it feels bad, but I don't necessarily think it's wrong. And I think one of the challenging things here is like the scale that we're talking about, not only from like an impact perspective on like services across the world, but what I mean is like the scale of teams that have to interact. So, for example, the startup that I was at, there might be situations where a different product team is like, hey, we're going to have a dependency on you for this, right? Like we would have to, our mobile acquisition tool is going to have to feed into a command line tool. Or there's going to be a workflow revamp in one of the main products that we fit into. So like, how are we planning to do that? So this stuff would come up. It wasn't zero. But at Microsoft, it's like, especially as a platform team, there is a lot more interaction with other groups, a lot more dependencies. Like it's nuts in comparison. So I part of me gets it, right? Where we have to make sure that we're communicating these things, like making plans so that people know we're going to stick to them so they can expect when things are going to be delivered. So I get it, but the reason I'm saying it feels bad is because the same reality happens, which is priorities change. So if you make commitments about delivering stuff, that team that you're delivering for, they might have shifting priorities. You might have to end up dropping it because you have something else that's come up that's mission critical. Like things change. So while I understand that some of the planning is beneficial in the sense that people need to know their dependencies, what's coming up, plan for it, understand how they can deliver on timelines, I get it. But like I said, what's not changing is the fact that there is uncertainty and things do change in terms of like what has to get focused on. So let me see if this guy's going to let me pass. Nice. There's only one lane here, but basically everyone leaves the right side open so we can fly past, except this idiot at the front. At least he moved over enough. This person is driving at a really awkward speed, like they're trying to move in this lane, but not. We'll go past them. So, yeah, part of it feels kind of bad because we're going slow and there's like more overhead. But like I think I can rationalize why it happens. Now, what I find really fascinating is like, it appears to me like that's the steady state of doing things. Okay, so the steady state of doing things feels on the surface like it's much slower because there's more overhead. Now, what's the fascinating part to me is that there are situations where if we really need to focus and drive progress on something, that that sort of startup feel comes back. Even though it's a huge company, on a team that's like interacting with tons of other teams, if we say like, Like, this stuff's got to get done. This is urgent. If it's a live site issue, whatever it happens to be, right? When there's something where it's like we need the team to rally, it's so interesting to me that all of the process, it's like they're, I don't know a good way to say this because it's going to sound weird when I say we can bypass the process. It's almost like we prove to ourselves we can get shit done without the heavy process. Right? It's almost like we snap out of it and we're like, boom, like here's efficiency to the max. And then we get through something and it's like, okay, back to steady state, where steady state is this more heavy-handed approach. So I find it very interesting, to be honest. And you know, I have my bias that I prefer like the startup kind of feel of just like be as lightweight, as nimble as possible. Some would call that agile. It's like I have a bias for that, but at the same time, I can totally get that like more structure can be helpful in a larger organization. So I think I would, if I could like, I don't know, influence more areas at Microsoft, I guess, and this would apply to not just Microsoft. I work at Microsoft, so this is my bias to be able to talk about this. It would be trying to remind, especially other engineering managers, like I don't think anyone in leadership would complain about this, is what, like how I'll preface this, but finding ways to be more like nimble in our approach. Right? I don't think that anyone in leadership is going to complain about that. So if you're following processes that don't make sense, like we should be speaking up about these things. If you're like, yeah, I know this is what it's been recommended, this is what we always have done, like I feel like it's easier to be complacent with that stuff at a bigger company. And it's potentially because it's harder to drive that kind of change, perhaps. But I feel like, I don't know, like within a team, we should have that autonomy to be able to do that. Now, if we have to have planning and stuff reported up to leadership or something, like, okay, like that's a requirement on your team, and plan for that, do that work. You might decide like, hey, we did this and maybe it didn't feel effective for you or something, just as an example. Like maybe that's an opportunity to talk to someone in leadership and say, hey, like, you know, we went through this process. Here's the value that we feel we're getting out of it, given all this work. And like, is this actually that much value for you? Because if it's not, we should change this. I personally don't know, like certainly for me as an individual, like as a engineering manager, sort of at the first level of management, I don't know that I see a lot of that happening, and I'm not saying that it doesn't, but like number one, I don't feel like I'm driving that at all, and number two, I don't know if other people are, but that's something that like I would like to see more of. Maybe I should lead by my own example and say more of this. I think I started to do this on the previous team I was on, where I was making a little bit more noise saying like, I hear the process you're talking about, but that doesn't feel like that's an effective use of time kind of thing. So I started to do that a little bit more. So just a thought, right? Like I think we can always improve. I think we should always be trying to improve. And that means that we have to challenge how we're doing things, always. Right? We should be questioning these things. We should be understanding, because it might be a rock solid option today, and we try it out and we go, hell yeah, this is helping us so much, and we stick to it. But if we never go back and revisit these things and question them, like we stagnate. And some of those things that may have been super awesome to try and do now become a hindrance. They're the things that slow us down, but we go, we've just kind of always done it this way, right? So why would we change? So I think it's very important to be constantly curious, question stuff like this, and I feel like that's what drives the continuous improvement. Might mean some uncomfortable conversations, right? Like we don't think that this is valuable. Like Who wants to hear that, right? But if it's not valuable, like, what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish with whatever process or whatever is being discussed? What's the goal of that? Because if we're not finding what we're doing valuable, maybe it's still the right goal, but maybe the way we're doing it is wrong. Or maybe the goal itself is like, it's no longer needed and we should rethink things. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts for engineering teams. Trying to remain agile, I think it requires that you are constantly questioning stuff. I don't think, oh, this guy's not driving. You're missing your advance. Silly. You don't need to be practicing like agile with a capital A. I'm also not saying that agile with a capital A doesn't work. Briefly, I ran another team in parallel to one of mine that was, oh, this car has Christmas lights on it. Holy shit. You see that? I don't know if you can see through the window, but that's a distraction if I ever seen one. That's for sure. I ran a team in parallel to one of mine. So at one point in time, I had two teams towards the end of my time at that forensic company. And the second team was literally stood up to be an efficiency thing, where we took something that we could carve out from another team and said, there's this type of work that seems very repetitive, very structured, not repetitive in the sense that the individuals are doing repetitive work, but the structure is super repetitive. And we said, we really think that we can make something out of this that will go much faster if we only focus on this type of stuff on this team. And we proved the experiment. I can't remember the productivity increase, but it was nuts. And it's because we scoped out this particular type of work, but we literally did Kanban. And it worked well. And I'm not here to tell you, well, this is mirror all crappy. I'm not here to tell you like I love Kanban, it's the only way to go, or I love Scrum, it's the only way to go. No, these are just tools. For this team, it worked really well. And because we had everything already done for us in a way that was very repetitive, in my opinion, it made it ideal for being like, how do we want to tweak this process? Like, do we change our whip limit? Do we change these other things so that we can try to optimize, measure, and learn? But I thought that was a really cool team that we spun up. I love that it was like an experiment to try out. We said, we'll try it, we'll see if it's effective, and like really good results from it. No idea if they continued that after I left. But I think that we were proving the value. So there's different ways to do stuff. And I think that at the end of the day, if you are on a software development team, I mean, if you're not the one managing it, I would still strongly encourage you to think about what are ways that we could work more effectively as a team. And that can take many different shapes, but I think it requires conversation. So that's all I got. So hopefully that was not too ranty and rambly, but you know what to expect by now. So thanks so much. I will see you in a couple days. So I'm not going to the office every day this week. Take care.